Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Levent Sucuoğlu. I'm the city manager for City of Tamarack, and we wholeheartedly welcome this distinguished panel from ULI. Thank you for being here. We're excited to hear everything that's happening out there in the world, and we're looking forward to a lively and very informational, beneficial conversation. Thank you, Mayor and Commission, for joining us today. We appreciate your attendance, and thank you to all the other members that are from our Planning Commission and all the other places. Thank you all for being here. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Julie with ULI. She's going to lead the rest of this conversation for this afternoon. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful, beautiful day. I thought to myself, I see why the parking lot is so full today, because the weather is just absolutely beautiful. Could you imagine a more perfect day to be golfing? I realized that actually 5 years to today's date, January 31st, 5 years ago, we were here with you at a different location, but here in the city of Tamarack presenting some education for you. Just want to say thank you for welcoming us back and entrusting us with this very important topic. So I've been with ULI for 20 years, and I'm the executive director for the Southeast Florida and Caribbean District Council. And what is ULI? ULI is the oldest and largest network of cross-disciplinary real estate and land use experts in the world. We're a nonprofit, and we have 45,000 members worldwide and 1,300 here in Southeast Florida. So who are our members? We bring together lots of sectors of real estate, including designers, developers, attorneys, planners, engineers, policymakers, lenders, and students, just to name a few. Our goal is to positively impact our communities, and ULI's mission is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. Oh, I'm sorry. So you didn't get to see my slides. How do we accomplish our mission? So in a nutshell, we focus on advising, educating, and convening. And we do that with around 40 events that we hold locally per year, all with the purpose to advance in the field of land use worldwide, with the sustainable and thriving communities being our priority. So we are a member-led organization and fortunate to have some incredible leaders like the panel that you see here today. They're all volunteers and they're all amazing real estate professionals. And I'm very, very thankful that we have their time here this afternoon. January is a super busy month for them, for all of us, of course, and we're very thankful for their time. It is now my pleasure to introduce Walter Duke, who's the moderator for this afternoon's workshop. And Walter is the president of Walter Duke and Partners, a leading provider of appraisals and market studies for affordable housing communities throughout Florida. He currently chairs the Housing Affordability Subcommittee of the Broward Workshop and co-chairs the Affordable Housing Committee for the Prosperity Partnership of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance. So for some of you who are elected officials, he has been in your shoes. He is also a former mayor of Dania Beach and chairman of the Dania Beach CRA. Working closely with our elected officials and planning staff, nonprofits, and other stakeholders, Walter has played an integral role in Broward County advocating for increased financial investment and land use policy changes that have resulted in a more robust pipeline of affordable housing communities in Broward County. Please welcome Walter.
Thanks. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, everybody. So, as Julie mentioned, my name is Walter Duke. I am a recovering politician. I'm here to announce that to everybody. I'm doing well. Thank you. But I am a bit of a unicorn in this space because I'm a commercial real estate professional, and I also was an elected official. And so I don't know very many elected officials that are also real estate appraisers and vice versa. So it's kind of fun to be here with this team and with you guys. And I feel like I have a unique perspective that I can add some value here today. And so we're looking forward to that. And I will tell you, we have an unbelievable panel lined up. Julie has really outdone herself. I've worked with or personally know all of these folks up here, and they are top in their games, and they're well sought after for their professional expertise, and we're lucky to have them here today. So I just want to quickly sort of go through sort of the 6 reasons why we're here. And we took notes from talking with folks at the city, and we talked amongst ourselves in some of the pre-meetings, and I kind of summarized what it is I think we're trying to get done today. Number one, we want to demonstrate that development with density in the right place is appropriate. Number two, we want to demonstrate some of the benefits of density, how it can contribute to commercial corridor and plaza revitalization, how it can be linked to attracting new and improved restaurants and retail, how it leads to positive economic outcomes, including adding to the commercial tax base, which we could all use, how to effectively navigate community concerns density that will negatively impact the existing community character, so how to combat NIMBYism and how to address that, how to provide a working understanding of commercial real estate market demand and attracting development investment. Number five, discuss the importance of being business friendly and being consistent and understanding the time sense of urgency and predictability that the development community needs to make decisions. And also finally discuss the importance of a shared vision that elected officials need to have in championing projects throughout the city. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to run to 4:45 today, at which time we're going to do some Q&A for about 45 minutes. We have 5 panelists that are going to talk for about 85 minutes. Generally speaking, it's okay to ask a question, but I'm not going to let you get into stories. We're going to cut that off. We can do the stories afterward, or the war stories, but we want to let the flow of these speakers continue to flow. But we also want it to be a productive back and forth. So if there's a clarification or just a quick question, please, by all means, don't be afraid to ask. And then we will adjourn at 5:30. So our first speaker, I can tell you, I've heard him speak, I've heard him present, and his name is Juan Mullarat, and he is a founding principal of Plesurbia Design. I've been around density issues for 40 years in my career and through my public service, and I've never really heard someone lay it out and provide such a unique, fresh perspective to density and some of the benefits of density, and the fact that in many ways density can be your friend as a city and as an elected community when you talk about trying to have economic sustainability to your local economy. So Juan is the founding principal of Plesurbia. It's a Miami-based urban design and planning firm specializing in city planning and urban design. Juan serves on several international boards and committees that deal with livability and the built environment. He's an award-winning consultant, urbanist, and thought leader whose practice is rooted in the collaboration for design of contextual cities, towns, and neighborhoods that create lasting value and cultural identity. Juan's work has spanned from Asia to Latin America, and here in the U.S. with recognition by APA in 2017 with a national award for the Wynwood Neighborhood Revitalization District, the Hialeah TOD, and the Little Havana Revitalization Master Plan. It's my great pleasure to bring up Juan. Let's give him a big hand.
So now I have to live up to that introduction. Thank you for having me, Walter. Thank you for the intro. Is this up? All right, here we go. So density, scary word. I wanted to begin by showing everybody how we have urbanized in the last 200 years, 220 some years. Cities have grown tremendously, and in 2019, there was a shift in the demographics in the world, where now we have more people living in cities than we have in rural areas. In fact, in 1800, we had 80% living in rural areas, 20% living in cities. Now it's totally shifted. Now we have 80% living in cities and 20% living in rural areas. In the United States, what we've seen is that there has been an agglomeration of cities. So while you might be concerned about what's happening in Tamarack, your issues and your anxiety needs to be tied to what's happening around you. You're not alone, and the residents that you have in your city are working in most cases in other places, and people are driving in and out all the time. So you can't think of yourselves in isolation. You need to think of the entire Broward County. In fact, you have to think about what's happening in the entire state of Florida. In fact, Florida is quite unique because, as you know, we have a lot of protected land, and so we can only build in the coast generally, especially in South Florida. And what's happening is that we have a lot of people coming in, right? 500 people a day, right? There's only so many places where they can live, right? In Tamarack, you have seen, this moving super, what happened here? I'm not touching it. I'm not touching it. It's not me. Maybe I was, can I go back here? Somebody else doing this? Are you guys touching the buttons? All right, do you want to give the presentation? All right, so I don't know if I should hit or say next. So in Tamarack, as you probably know, you've grown quite a bit in terms of your population from the 1970s. You are now around 70,000 people. What's interesting is that you're not alone. And around the world, cities are getting bigger. So small cities of less than 300,000 are disappearing, in part because they are growing and more people are moving to cities, as I was saying before. But the other part of it is that they are what we call conurbanation. They are mixing with the cities around them. So suddenly you've got these very large metro areas that are becoming like one larger city. You can see this, you probably have not seen much of an open space as you're driving up from here to all the way to probably Tallahassee, but especially if you head south and you go to Miami, you probably have not seen much of a separation. And if you weren't from here, you wouldn't really know the difference. What's really interesting is that from, recently in the last, and I can't see the numbers from here, but in the last about 30 years, density has remained the same. Which means what? It means that people that are moving here generally are moving into open areas. So while there's been a lot of people moving to Florida, city densities in general have remained the same. That's probably a surprise for you all, right? Because you're seeing a lot more people and you feel that you're a lot denser than you were 10 or 20 years ago. But think about the following. You've got 10 tables here. You've got an average of about 4 to 5 people per table. So, and you've got 45, unless somebody walked in while I was giving the presentation, there was 44 people when I started the presentation, which means what? You've got 4.4, if each table was an acre, you have 4.4 residents per acre. At the same time, you would have suburbia here. Actually, we have 45 people. But we have suburbia here at 2.5, and over there, I think it's the largest table, we have 6 people over there. So you've got huge disparity between, huge, considering the type of density that you have in this city. You've got 6 units an acre versus the 2 units an acre. But when you average everything out, it's 4.4. These people would live with more room around them, and those people would probably be the downtown. What typically remains the same in every presentation that I give is that there's typically less density as you come closer to the speaker. So, which is also the same thing that you see across the United States, where in the suburbs you've got a lot less density and a lot less good utilization of space. And space, traffic, and density, all those things come together or go together, and that's partly what I want to talk about. I want to dispel the myth that density is height, right? Space, density, and I want to dispel, or try to dispel, and maybe I won't convince you all, but if I convince one person, I will have done my job, that density does not necessarily mean more traffic. I'm sorry? You're convinced? Good. Let's back up.
That's it, back up.
And then the other one that I want to discuss, and I'll discuss at the end of it, is that density does not necessarily mean more traffic. It's the way that you have your land uses that mean more traffic. So those are my goals, and let's see if I can achieve them. This image basically shows what I have just discussed with you in this practical exercise with the 44 people in the 10 tables. Places like Tokyo and Hong Kong, you think of the big skyscrapers, is actually in the smaller high-rises where you find most of the density. And density is made up, if you think about it, not necessarily in units per acre always. We can talk about people per acre. So you've probably heard of the term overcrowding. It's something that is, a huge concern everywhere, and is partly the reason why we have zoning laws today. Well, overcrowding is how many people we have per unit and how big the unit is. If you have the same units with 2 people, which is the 2.6 people, which is the average in the United States, but it depends on how big that unit is, you will be overcrowded. If you have 10 people, that's a lot of a very different situation. And so we can speak about building density, we can speak about how those units are dispersed throughout the city, and we can also talk about how many units per acre. All these things are very difficult to explain, and unless we are speaking the same language, unless your city officials and your planning officials and your staff can communicate properly and with the same, now it's not working anymore, with the same language, you're going to realize that while people are screaming no more density, they really mean no more traffic. When people are saying no more height, they really mean let us retain our character. So the question is always, is it really density that we're talking about, or are we talking about protecting our character, our city character? Are we talking about no more traffic? And typically is the traffic. Trust me, I drove over from Miami and it was not fun. But the most important thing that I want you to take out of this slide is, let's try and speak the same language. And most of the time when the public comes to us, it is not density that they are afraid of. It is more about the morphology that they are seeing on the ground. If they see a big tower, they will think density. If they see smaller buildings, they will say either mid-range or low density. As you can see here in this example, those two have the same amount of units, 65 units an acre. It's really how you place them. Again, the same example that I was giving you with the tables. Is that suburbia over there, and is that the average to the city, or is it everybody together? So what is the density of the city? How many people live in our entire city, and how we house them is very important. I put this slide up because just to make the point, density is not an easy thing to describe, right? Density is not something that we can communicate clearly about most of the time, and it is something that is very, it creates anxiety with your stakeholders and generally with every stakeholder, every community that I've worked on. So the best way to talk about density is to visualize it. In this slide, I'm showing you 2 buildings, again, to prove the point. The one on the left, the one on the left has 124 units, and the one on the right has 154. How do they do it? Well, the units are more efficient because it's less than 3 stories. The building code does not require an elevator. The units are placed in such a way that there is minimal or no corridors. It has no amenities, and most importantly, because it's a 1920s building, it does not have any parking, right? The amenity in this case, on the one on the right, which is actually in Little Havana, is the community itself. It's the neighborhood itself. The investment that the city makes is in a shared park. And the HOA, if you will, is also minimal because the residents don't have to pay for that added infrastructure that is private. So the amenity is public and the units are much more affordable. In Tamarack, you have places like this. And I'm going to show a couple of examples. I don't want to criticize because it's not really a criticism. You've got a significant amount of 4 units per acre development, and it is quite built out. In fact, I think that other than the golf courses that you have around, it's really not much more that you can develop without redeveloping the existing area. Similar to that skipped a couple too. Did we skip a couple? All right, so that's Tamarack. What I also found, next. What I also found was that there were some blocks that you have mix of density, which is actually very interesting. In most places where I go, you either have high density and low density and nothing in between. This block that I found in your town, you've got everything from a 3 dwelling unit an acre cul-de-sac to a 10. It's not really a high-rise, it was 3 stories, I believe, 3 or 4 stories. And so a diversity of density is not new to you, and putting these diverse building types next to each other is not new to you either. So residents, in terms of having to present to residents the opportunity of having a mix of housing, should not be new to them, and it should not really create anxiety, as long as, again, you can present to them clear and concrete examples, and you don't have to go too far for them to find them. I'm showing you a couple of others just to get a sense of what scale density means. This is Portland. It's one of the most beautiful neighborhoods that I have been to, residential neighborhoods that I've been to. It has 14 units an acre. Remember, the previous slide I was showing you a 4-story building, right? And it was 10 units an acre. This is 14. So start thinking about where that land is going, right? I'm going to go back once, and I'll show you, and I'll make the point again. You see the amount of parking that you have around here? In comparison, in Portland, you've got shopping and you've got mixed use within walking distance. And so the amount of parking that you need in these types of neighborhoods is minimal. Philadelphia, another one, of course, quite different from yours. 652 units an acre. And it looks like this. These are some of the most beautiful streets that we have in this country, very old. Another one is San Francisco, and this one is actually funny. You guys will be familiar with the image to the right? The pink ladies, right? What was it, Full House, right? And who would have thought that it has this much density? And if you look at it from the aerial, you see that the block incorporates a high-rise, it incorporates apartment units, it incorporates these beautiful townhouses. So at a smaller scale, I guess, in terms of land area, this is the same than that block that I showed you in Tamarack, where you begin to mix densities. And the question is how much further your residents are willing to take that concept of mixed housing, mixed density. A good example that I have studied quite a lot is in Miami. This is actually my neighborhood. It's 24 units an acre, single family, mostly. I say mostly because the image on the right shows a 3-story apartment building which fits, it's nestled inside of the small single family residential of 1 to 2 stories. I mentioned 1 to 2 stories because most of your residential, including here, you're allowed 2 stories. So from 2 to 3, if you do good landscape in the front, is almost indistinguishable. So you can have an entire street with good landscape and with a mix of housing and really not change the character. We've also done some studies and we've retro-engineered. In fact, this is the most fun I have most of the time in my business, is not inventing anything new. It's actually studying how people used to do it before we became dumb, right? So when we got air conditioners, when we got elevators, we started being lazy. I'm talking now about architects and developers, and sorry, no offense to all the developers here. But in general, the profession of developing and building has become dumb because we have a lot of crutches. We have the ability to use all this technology, and so we don't think anymore. We don't use cross ventilation. We spend a lot of money on, I don't know if you guys turned on your AC this morning, but the weather was fantastic, so you just had to open the windows. It reminds me, once I went with my father to New York, and we were in a hotel, and he said, let's go to Macy's and buy some clothes. I said, sure. He said, what's the weather like? And me, in my generation, I pulled out my iPhone and I started looking for the weather app. At the same time, he opened the window and stuck his hand out, right? And this is how we need to go back to the simple technologies. So retro-engineering is very important, and if you begin to look at how older buildings were developed, they were much more efficient than what we are doing today. This is a snapshot of one of the neighborhoods in Little Havana, and you can see here, with the combined apartment buildings of 18 units and the single family and the ancillary unit in the back and the duplex and a few other illegal stuff that people did in this neighborhood, you've got 50 units an acre. And the place looks like this, right? Single family in the front, most of it. You can see that you have a triplex on the side. So you can begin to mix and match this density, making neighborhoods a lot more interesting and not necessarily change the character. So specifically about Tamarack. And again, I'm going to show you a couple of examples. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. The issue is not your density. The issue is how you mix and match your land uses and what do you allow next to each other. This is sort of like the doctor telling you, you know, do not mix, right? Well, I encourage you to mix because that's what makes rich neighborhoods. That's what makes rich cities. The other thing that mixing densities and mixing uses and mixing opportunity for your residents is the need that you have, I believe, based on the little research that I've done, to reduce your car trips, okay? And this is where I'm going to try and convince you on my second goal, which is traffic is not necessarily, or density does not necessarily equal traffic. In part because right now you have about 90% of your residents are moving in and out of your city every morning and every evening, right? So the traffic that you have is not necessarily because people are just driving through, you know, those people from Fort Lauderdale, right? No, it's you guys. Because you are not providing, this city is not providing the necessary jobs for people to actually live and work here. So what do? They get in their car and then they drive a bunch of miles. And by the way, it's not just you, it's most of the United States. In fact, studies show that about 30% of people, 30% of trips in this country are less than 1 mile. 1 mile. I wonder how much you guys run on a treadmill every morning. Right? I mean, if you had good infrastructure that encourages good, healthy sidewalks and places to walk, you know, it would be much cheaper. You know, you're not going to have to pay for your gym membership anymore. And it would be a lot healthier in terms of your car trips, etc. Let me give you a practical example. I chose a neighbor of yours. This is just outside your city. I just didn't want to select something in your city because I didn't want anybody to say, oh my God, I live there. So imagine, does it work? Imagine Joe lives on the left-hand side and he takes this trip to go pick up his son's friend who lives about 300 feet away, but he has to drive 1.4 miles to do that. And then he picks up that friend and he goes, did it change? He picks up that friend and goes down the street to get a burger for his son and his friend. At the same time, did it work?
Yep.
Okay, I can't see it. At the same time, his wife takes a different route to just go do some shopping. On her way there, she picks up a friend. Over here, oh, let's skip twice. Over here, oh well, I'm giving up. Ultimately, what could have been a 1 mile walk or even less than a mile walk turns to be about 7 miles. You know, people walking is just not something that that happens in neighborhoods like this because they are not encouraging walkability. So while you might think that this creates freedom, it actually doesn't create freedom. It ties you to your car, and your car ties you to traffic. And suddenly you say, oh my God, this is too dense. It's not too dense. It's the land use that you have that basically puts cars on the street. So this is when I take a pause for a second, ask you how much time I have, and also to let you know that I love my car and I drive a lot. And I'm not anti-car, but you have to provide your residents with choices. Where in your city can you provide?
16 minutes.
16? Oh my God, I'm going to go slower. Bring me some cake. I'll be faster. This is where I'm going to tell you that it's not about getting cars, you know, making the cars the villains. They are in a way, But what you need to provide, and I think what I've found is that most residents are always looking for is choice. If you provide choice, you'll have better values for your properties. You'll have a healthier real estate environment where you have more investment, more varied investment, which is no different than your stocks. You want to diversify both in terms of mobility, in terms of the types of housing that you're providing, and it'll create competition, which ultimately will also improve the demographics that you have here today. Another example, surprising as well, and I'm showing you this one because I think that that is important to note, that different building stock built in different times required different things and met different needs from both the end user and the code that was required at the time. In this case, in the 1920s in Miami, back then we did not have zoning, and the building code was before the hurricane. In this case, you have here, and this is the county appraiser, over 300 units in one single building in 3 stories. Don't ask me how. But this is what the county appraiser has. In comparison, just next door, you have a post-war 1970s car-oriented building with a lot less. It was 30-something, let me see. 35 units. And those live next door to each other. So which one, I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but which one do you think provides most service to the community? And the answer, in reality, is neither. It's both. Because what, again, you're providing is choice. Choice for someone who wants to live with 2 parking spaces in front of their home, someone that wants to live in an urban area. Now, these urban areas would not function unless we provide the right types of mixed uses. I took also a screenshot of this development here, and now is when I'm going to duck if somebody throws something at me, because this is in Tamarack. This is also your typical development, apartment development that you have here. What you notice here is the amount of space that's devoted to the car and the little amount of commercial or work destinations. Most of this aerial that I'm showing you here, which is about almost half a mile, has no destinations whatsoever. I can bet you, and also I took a look at the way that the main roads are looking, that nobody or very few people in these areas actually walks to work or to shop to buy their daily needs. Nobody lives here, right? In the crowd? Nobody lives in this? Okay. Is this a retirement community?
Where you are, yeah. I mean, most of the way we were structured and built, we were retirement and snowbirds.
And fortunately or unfortunately, those retirees also drive. So they have the, well, I'm not going to get into the age risk. I think that it's important to take care of the needs of all the generations. In this case, I can only imagine someone who, at a certain age, is visually impaired or has he or she is not able to drive. What do? They probably hang out in these red areas over here. Oh wait, this thing is. Go back. I spoiled the surprise. They probably spend time in these red areas, which is the amount of parking that you're providing in all of these developments. Now, mind you, there's 2 reasons why there's this much parking. One is your code, right? The other one is the requirement that banks have for a minimum parking for their units in order to provide money for the development. There is an in-between, and I'm telling you that this is a bit of an extreme. I have seen, I've seen worse, but this is pretty bad, the amount of parking that you're devoting to asphalt. It's also quite environmentally, well, anyway, I'm not going to go into that one. Yes. This slide is a bit of a reality check, and I like to use this in most of my presentations because people don't picture parking from 20,000 feet above ground. And once you see that, it really is shocking how much you're devoting to your cars and how much you're devoting to your residents. And just as a form of comparison, a parking spot of about 485 square feet, that includes some gives for ADA and all, it's the size of some of the apartments in Miami. It's a one-bedroom apartment. Now, we have an affordability crisis, but our cars are living, in paradise, right? We are seeing in some places retrofits of parking garages. I know that you guys don't have any, but trying to use your land uses and figuring out how these land uses fit well within your community is really important, and how much parking you're requiring of them is also important. Now, mind you, just because you require less parking doesn't mean the developers are not going to build it, right? It's just that you're not going to require it. So parking should be the result of market demand, just like a pool, right? We were talking about amenities earlier. Developers should have the choice to provide the amount of parking or the number of amenities based on the market, not your codes. This is an important slide which gives you a sense of the way that different building typologies fit within a city. The ones on the left are the ones that you have the most of, which are land thirsty, right? They're larger lots, low density, and they push typically residents to the suburbs. These typologies are typically reserved for the suburbs. The one in the middle, which is the one that typically is not built, and surprisingly you have a significant amount of, it's just that it's all disconnected, is land efficient. It rarely requires land assembly in comparison to the larger buildings, to the much taller buildings, which typically require a lot more assembly. None of these are the correct answer. A mix of them is important. And the question that you guys should be asking yourselves is where? Let's see if I can go to the next one. So when you begin to look at where that should go, you're obviously going to get pushback from your single-family residents. And if you don't, I swear I'm moving here. But typically, in every municipality, what we see is anxiety from single-family neighbors, thinking that there's going to be density. They might be talking about traffic, but they just don't want anything close to them. And it's understandable. They've invested. If they are retirees, they have the value in their home. They're not going to move, right? And so they are afraid of what might happen. So the codes need to be predictable, and the codes need to protect that way of life. In looking at your plan and your zoning map and your comprehensive plan, the natural place to actually put density and begin to create some mix of uses is in your corridors. Why? Because you already have your traffic. You pretty much have, in fact, you have some mixed-use zoning already. The question that comes to me is, where is your destination? And I think that I had the same question when I came here in 2018, which was, where is the there of Tamarack? When you say Tamarack, what do you picture? And is everybody picturing the same thing? Because one of the things that I have not found yet, and I hope that you'll prove me wrong, and then I'll drive to it, because I probably won't be able to walk, but I'd like to know where you think the identity of Tamarack is. Which corner, which destination, where should I go? By the way, congratulations on this building, it's amazing. Surrounded by parking, but understandable because you have no other way to get to this. Is this where it's going to be? Is this the nexus? Is this the center? Is this where your density, your downtown is going to be? Or is it a linear feet downtown, right? Is it going to be a corridor-based downtown where you don't have anything unique about it? So I encourage, as you're thinking of density, as you're thinking of growth, as you're thinking about accommodating future development, as you're thinking about investment in your city, how do your corridors change? Because that's probably where it's going to be less impactful to your single-family residents. Okay, there you go. This is an example that we did in West Miami, where we try to give the community a sense of what would happen if little by little we change the zoning, and little by also providing some public transportation, what would things look like, and how many less than a mile car trips would residents living within a quarter-mile walking distance of this project have to drive. And with that, I'm done. Am I early?
Juan is 5 minutes early. If anybody wants to jump in with a question or two, please.
Easy ones, please. Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Okay, so earlier you spoke about everybody have to talk the same language. You talked about density, and you later talked about the identity of the city or the people around it. So what would be your best advice to have everybody be on the same page? And what do you say to commissioners if the community is not on the same page? Which one becomes the martyr?
It's a great question. And it's not an easy one. Thank you for that. Most of my job as a planner, as an urban designer, believe it or not, is not about designing, it's about education. And so, and what I found is that most of my time is spent talking to people and trying to figure out common ground. And it starts by using the right language, like I said, getting to the bottom of things. Someone will come to you and will say, I do not want anything more than 4 stories. Well, okay, I can fit 65 units an acre in 4 stories. I just showed you 135 in a 3-story, right? They're not talking about density, they're not talking about height. They're talking about the character of their community. They're worried about their traffic. They're worried about the value of their home. You need to get to the bottom of their anxiety. Why is it that they're anxious? And are they really talking about the density or the height? And so that's when you begin to, that's really talking to people and trying to begin to have a conversation, a real conversation with the same terms, same terminology. Because unless they understand the implication, or unless they understand what they're talking about, and most of the time they don't, you will never get to the bottom of things, you will never get the right answer. I'm thinking, we're working in Hialeah, not much height there. They have a maximum of 10 stories, which I know it's more than you guys, but they have 10 stories around the Metro Rail stations. I had a lady come to me and said, oh my God, 10 stories next to my house. I said, ma'am, where's your house? She said, well, 10 blocks away. So I walked with a lady, and with a group of people. I walked with that lady to her home. She's got some beautiful trees in front of her house. She can't see anything. It doesn't matter if I put 20 stories next to the Metro Rail 5 blocks away, right? So talking with people, walking with people, going to see the real problems on the ground will help a lot to dispel some of those problems, some of that anxiety.
Baron wants to chime in here.
Yeah. Can you hear me? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Baron Chan. I'll be talking a little bit, but to the question, just a technical point that's often ignored. Sometimes the leadership of the city are concerned about engaging their citizens around charrettes, because oftentimes the idea of a charrette or the conversation popped up because of an urgent need for a project. So there's a time limitation. My encouragement to you is, as you start to envision 20 years down the line, 20, 30 years down the line, have charrettes and talk to people about what you want the city to look like and feel like conceptually. Talk through some of these issues around density and height so that people are aware of it. Talk to them about the budget issues, not specific issues, but you want growth because you want to support them. You have inflation, your revenues, you need real estate in a property tax state. If you have charrettes and talk this through and move the same people around to cities, inform it with urban planners, inform it with business people, I think you can get to a point where you at least have shared understanding, and then you can make a better decision, not rushed by a specific project or a specific transit opportunity.
I would, Anthony Diuri, Bills and Sunberg. I'm the bad zoning attorney, but I also develop myself and have to deal with the realities of the pro forma and profitability. And I just want to piggyback on those comments that if you can't, the neighbors look at it on a project-by-project basis, and it's only about the negatives of that one project because that's what they're kind of programmed to do. And also because that one project can't necessarily create all the benefits that planning can create over the long term. And so my piggyback to that comment is, look at it holistically, and how you protect your single families is absolutely paramount, but also how you plan the overall city so that it's not 1950 where, we're like bowing down to the altar of the car, and we would get in the car to go to get our hair done, get in the car to get a hamburger, get in the car to go to Home Depot, get in the car to do everything. And we can leverage some of those planning tools to do protection and also long-term reorientating of the community, because one project at a time is always a recipe for disaster. So, and then if you can make it administrative and predictable for developers, they will come here. It will be like, was it Field of Dreams? If you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
If you create the proper regulatory environment, they will build it, and then the people will come to the right places.
Thank you, Anthony. That's a great
There's a
segue.
question over there.
Yeah, one quick question, then we'll move on. Mayor?
Yeah, I have a quick question that's just been lengthened a little bit, so I'm just reserving my time for after the panel, because, thank you.
Okay, sounds good. That was a great segue, Anthony. So we heard about density and some of the misconceptions, and Juan did such a great job educating us on density. Next, we're going to hear from Anthony Graziano, the blue jacket there, and Anthony Diori.
I'll be Tony. I'll go with Tony.
Tony. Okay, Tony.
I'll lower my stature a little
We're going to
bit.
find out in a second we call Anthony Graz. So we're going to get a couple nicknames going. So these guys are going to talk about the economic benefits associated with what Juan just talked about. We talk about tax base and generating revenues and making improvements to your city and long-term economic sustainability. You got to have revenues and you got to have growth. So Tony and Graz are going to talk about that. So Anthony Graziano in the blue jacket is the CEO of Integra Real Resources. Graz has counseled and advised clients on the sale, leasing, valuation, management, and development of commercial real estate assets throughout the Northeast and Southeast United States since 1992. Graziano has specialized in consulting and valuation assignments for corporate and private clients, a wide array of complex issues related to valuation of property rights, litigation, and complex strategies. He's also worked on public and private development consulting. As the CEO of Integra Realty, Graz oversees 50 offices in North America and the Caribbean and is responsible for executing Integra's long-range strategic plan and providing operational direction to all Integra's senior management directors nationally. Graz is in my space, and I can tell you he's one of the best in the business, and we're very lucky to have him today. Tony Diure is the partner at Bills and Sundberg Land Development and Government Relations Group in Miami. His practice focuses on representation of real estate developers and investors in complex land use issues and zoning matters, with a focus on transit-oriented development, large-scale mixed development, mixed public-private partnerships. He also co-chairs the University of Miami's Real Property Development Advisory Board, and is also an adjunct professor in the program where he teaches problem-solving large-scale mixed-use development. Let's give these guys a big hand.
I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay here because Anthony and I are going to tag team this. Thank you very much, everybody.
We can make this like a routine, the two Tonys.
Totally, Tony
All
and
right,
Tony.
all right.
The Tony and Tony show. So a couple of just sort of basic principles. George Perez was quoted as saying one time, he said, the bankers are worried about making money. I'm worried about building a city. I think as a foundational concept, you should understand that the partners that you're able to attract based on the scale of projects and the opportunities that you have in your community contribute to your success. And if you have, as we've talked about before, a predictable process, that's important, but you also have to continue to do that outreach. Barron mentioned it before about doing charrettes and getting community involvement. Your community will take on a different level of development, a different momentum of development, if you will, if people see the community in action, changing and adaptable to change. Yes. Oh, that's very nice of you. Thank you. A couple of general disclaimers. So there's nothing here in this presentation that is Tamarack specific, except that obviously we know the markets, and I can generally tell you where real estate values are at any given point. So these are representative, but they're not Tamarack specific when I give these numbers out. There are no right and wrong answers. Somebody asked the question before, what do you do in the conflict between the residents and the leadership at the commission level? And the answer is you have to build consensus, but at some point you have to lead and recognize that most of the homeowners, most of your residents are very focused on what their particular issues are. Sometimes it's traffic, sometimes it's I don't want to build this because it's going to destroy my property value or it's going to change the character of the neighborhood and I don't like change. Some people, and I've seen this happen in communities that I've consulted with before, are very accustomed to what the value of their community is, and they're actually afraid to increase the value of their community because they think it's going to become unaffordable for their children to stay or unaffordable for their mom to stay or live in the town. And so sometimes you hear these sort of counter arguments like, well, I don't want to do this because it's going to make the town more valuable. And I go, wait a minute, isn't that the object, right? And so you have that disconnect. So just remember really that there's this idea that you have to, as you're doing city planning, you have to take the long view. It is important to take a larger approach than a project-specific approach in terms of thinking about what you want your community to look like. And then also you sort of have to separate your aspirations for what you think could happen if you get this one development in town as opposed to what's good for the overall community. So start with the end in mind. What are you trying to accomplish? I think Juan said it best. Where's the center? Do you want a town center that attracts people to gather at the town center? Because that absolutely, the developers love to build those, right? Or at the same time, do you want to just improve the general character and mobility of the neighborhood and the walkability of the community? Is that more important, that you have these sort of corridors and you put the physical activity, or rather the economic activity around these corridors, because that's where your traffic is, but it's also where people are used to being and used to seeing, right? Tamarack has a lot of single-family communities that are either gated or by entrance you enter into them, and so I think it's more difficult to pull people into those types of communities. It's more disruptive than if you say, hey, we're going to take this commercial corridor and make this the center of activity. I can tell you generally, and I sort of bridge the gap between the old world and the new world, if you will. I'm 54 years old, and so I've seen land use evolve over time. There's clearly a lot more attention today being paid to affordability. Affordability in the community becomes very important and has almost become a community priority, which I think is good. But I can tell you in the downtowns that really work, it's about activity. It's about what things get people out of their homes. And what seems to work time and again is when you act, whatever type of development you pursue that's the newer type of development, it needs to create community activity, community gathering, community entertainment. You look at what Hollywood, Florida has done on the boardwalk. They built a band shell there. Now they have nightly, weekly musical events, and that's driving the retail sales on the boardwalk. It's also driving people to drive to Hollywood Beach, which is then servicing the commercial corridors within the beach. And that all, sort of snowballs in to be complementary to the hotel business. So I would say this, from an economic standpoint, density is good. A lot of people think immediately density is bad, but from a productivity, thank you. You were showing me the slide and I thought it was up there. From a productivity standpoint, it generally breaks down like this. As you add density to an acre, and I've given you an example here of 20,000 square foot lot, which is a half acre, right? An acre is 43,560 square feet, but we generally, 40,000 square feet is an acre, let's say, for argument's sake. So this is a sort of a half acre example. So if you had a half acre in Tamarack that was, just zoned for 1 unit to the acre, or, basically one home lot, what would a lot be worth? You look at that and you say, well, if the average housing value is a few $100,000, the lot's going to be worth, $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 maybe. And if it's improved, maybe a little more. But if you get, 15 units to the acre on a half acre, that lot, just the land alone, could be worth $550,000. If you increase from 15 to 30, yes, the price per unit goes down, right? You're going to pay a little bit less per unit because the units are probably going to be a little smaller. So instead of paying $80,000 per unit, you might pay $60,000. But you're going to have that many more units per acre. So all of a sudden, that same half acre site is worth $830,000. And if you get that density to 50 units an acre, the site could be worth, $1,150,000. This is just for half an acre. Now again, as Juan alluded to before, when you start to press up against densities more than about 35 or 40 per acre, it starts to change the morphology of the scale of what you're building on the site. But the point is that additional density does add value to the land. And that's part of the decision making is if you increase the density, it's going to increase the productivity and value of your land. But then that's also going to bring people in, they're going to pay more for the land, which should help support the property values in the other areas of town where you've also increased the density, right? Because you get that lift. It also increases your tax base. So for those that say density is bad, you could say, well, as Juan said, because of traffic, great. Economically, density is very good for a city economically because it helps you grow. Let's hit the next one. Oh, sorry, went the wrong direction. So the second myth, though, really has to do with if we rezone it and we allow for new density, well, people are just going to be flocking in. We're just going to increase the density, and people are going to flock in and build and build on the site. And that doesn't always happen. Why? Well, one reason it doesn't always happen is because sometimes you're putting a density overlay on something that's already developed, and the value of what's there is actually higher than the density value bonus that you've created, and you have to wait a little bit of time for that value to balance out. Sometimes buildings are in use, and at the time the investor or owner of that building looks at it and says, well, I could build an apartment complex there, but my retail is going really well and I don't need to do anything. And then all of a sudden they wake up and two of their major tenants move out and their bank starts putting pressure on them. They go, oh, now's time to redevelop. Right now is not a great time to redevelop. Construction costs are very high, interest rates are high, developers are really having to sharpen their pencil to get even the easiest projects off the ground at this moment as we sit here today. So I want to say this, just because you change the density doesn't mean that you're going to immediately see new development on sites. At the same time, we have to be mindful that, again, this is a long-range plan. So the idea is to put the things forward that allow you to, over time, see that development happen. Sometimes you need a catalyst. And then the last thing is, this idea that bigger developments are bad. Again, in my experience, and I'm going to let Anthony speak on this a little bit, the large-scale developments, one large-scale development in a community is not going to change the character of your community. It could be great from a rateable perspective, right, a big project, but then what happens is then the whole community looks at that and they go, well, that was it? It wasn't a bigger vision. There wasn't a broader vision behind it. So I would encourage you to not run away from bigger developments, but to remember you can't solve a 30-year development pattern or 40-year development pattern with one project. What you can do, though, is to start to implement the concepts and bring people to the project that allow them to get the feeling like, oh, if we continue to do this throughout the city, this is going to tie it all together. And so, I would encourage you not to try to just dump density in one area and hope that that attracts a developer and gets you what you need, because that's not really what you're after. What you're after is the mindset that density will drive ratables positively. It's good for value. What's good for values in your community are good for all your homeowners in your community, because when all values are coming up, that lifts all boats. So that's a good thing. And then to be mindful that, it's not about just one big development. It's about an overall vision of what do we want Tamarack to look like in the future. And I think y'all have a lot of incredible assets here. I think Tamarack, obviously in Florida generally, we've seen the progression of the lesser priced housing from east to west, right? The waterfront develops and then everything sort of moved west, and the further west you moved, the less expensive things got as you moved west. That development pattern ended around 1990 something, right? And now it's all infill. There is no more west to go, and everybody that's here is seeing the positive value accretion that happens when you run out of land. So now the question is, how do we create more land, which means adding some density, to continue to allow for growth, to allow for new things to occur? Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to have stagnation. Right? You don't want to wake up one day and all the homes are 60 years old and there hasn't been a new development in town, and how do we deal with that? Geographically, you're very well positioned. You've got the Sawgrass, you're west, you're a great bedroom community to a lot of the employment centers that are even far but proximate to the east. And you're in this area where you've got affordable opportunities here, but you've also got really good opportunities for growth. You're at an economic median income level of your households that's generally lower than the rest of the area, right? You're at about 57,000 household income on a median basis. Coral Springs is at like 79 or 80. And so you've got this northern neighbor that has the ability, you can attract some of those people to come down into Tamarack and visit and spend their money, at the same time grow from within here. And you've got a really sort of bright opportunity in the future. So I'm very happy to be here. I don't know, Ann, if you want to comment on a couple of other things as it relates to the economics of density?
Yeah, I mean, look, to piggyback on a couple of points from Graz. There are jurisdictions that I talk to all the time of varying sizes, some as small as 3,000, right up to Miami-Dade County, which is the largest in the entire state. And there's a lot of diversity in their approaches and a lot of things that you guys can pull from, because you're not 3,000 people, you're also not 2,000 people. You're in that sweet spot like Coral Gables or Doral is in Miami-Dade County. And so you have the ability, you have a certain critical mass of constituents that can allow you to create center of gravity in the town vis-a-vis the mixed-use environment that'll give you that ability to use the commercial to drive. You guys have a good bond rating, by the way, I checked. I always check jurisdictions to their bond rating, so city manager and everybody else, thumbs up on that. We can always, I think you all are AAA, yeah. I think you're all the bond agencies have you at least A, right? Okay, so that's fantastic. So you have yourself on good economic footing. The question is, how do you deliver more benefit economically to your residents or in the single-family neighborhoods, and they see the benefit of the density? You can drive down millage. If you drive down millage, that's the number one cost for anybody in any community is the cost of living. And one of the principal costs they have now always has been the millage rate. And so if you can find ways to increase your revenues and also drive down the millage, it makes life a lot easier for you, because then you have the magic formula of increasing services but also driving down the costs. And I see a lot of our service providers, our first responders, I see police in the room, I see fire in the room. And let me tell you something, when people move into districts, it matters to them that the police response time is there. It matters to them that the fire department is there. It matters to them when they go to the municipality that they're responsive to their needs. There's an ombudsman, perhaps. There's somebody that walk them through the building department. These are the things that make a community, and it's impossible to do it without revenue. And so that is, to me, the discussion, big picture, to get away from single project, tyranny of the minority comes out, pitchforks and torches, well, tiki torches here in Florida, out after the developer, because there's this misconception that one project is going to just destroy the quality of life of whoever the individual might be in that area. And so how you accomplish that, I think you got to look at the assets you have available as a public entity. This building that we're in right now is a testament to that. You have your public golf course that Tamarack owns, correct? You did this facility in conjunction with the hotel on the same lot, and that P3 model works fantastically. So look at the assets that you have citywide and how you can leverage them to create what you want out of your city. And then I would tell you that what you don't want to become, and then they've woken up from this, is the city of North Miami. North Miami has, and I love the city, they have a great opportunity because they had Johnson and Wales campus that closed down. And that's 20 acres in the middle of their town that was all of a sudden ripe for development. What do they have right next to that Johnson and Wales? They have a Whole Foods. What's down the block from that Johnson and Wales facility, those 20 acres? Brightline's putting in a station, okay? And now they said, hold on, we have this crazy opportunity here where we can really create something for our city that creates that center of gravity and that kind of town hall. And what did they have before that? The average age of multifamily development in North Miami was over half a century. I couldn't believe it. It was more like 70 or 75 years old. So the average age was like 1958. It was insane. It was nuts. And so you don't realize that until it's too late. and you're competing against other jurisdictions your size for commercial, to attract commercial activity, to attract quality developers, and ultimately people are deciding and they're voting with their feet on whether they want to live here or not, given the amount of services. North Miami has woken up. They've done a fantastic job, especially with their current electorate there over the last 10 years, and they've created transit-oriented development areas where they have planned it so that now they're saying, this is where we want to put the development. And what do we have there now? We have that going in there in a medium scale, under 75 feet, which is kind of a big hallmark in terms of construction. It doesn't come in at a tremendous high-rise level. It is at a pedestrian scale, but it's organized. And if you can look at your city and look at how you do these overlays, maybe North Miami's a good example. Miami-Dade County has urban centers that they've overlaid throughout the county that have worked very well, where they've created corridors, and through those corridors they've pushed and organized the development, because you can have your 70,000 people in many different ways. And those 70,000 people can create traffic, or those 70,000 people can be along a transit corridor. I know you also have a shuttle service that you run. I just don't know what the frequency, the headway of that shuttle service is. But if you can imagine a scenario where you organize your 70,000 people around a transit corridor, where you can have now a very frequent trolley service that get people from the single-family areas into your more entertainment areas and district and shuttle back. That can be done, but it has to be done on a larger scale. We got 5 minutes. And I would recommend to you, to avoid the pressures of smaller groups, is to do that and look at it in a larger scale and move to a more administrative approval process, as long as they comply with that plan that you have for the city. You're always going to have to come people that try to hit you with the rezoning. I don't like the public hearings. I don't like the rezonings. I tell people, let's do a deal that works within. I'm not fighting for lawyers. It's true. I am the anti-lawyer lawyer. That is fact. Because I have a team, and I'll tell you why. We have a team in the office, and we try to turnkey the project from environmental to entitlement to construction finance to the JV agreements to the construction documents. And so I'm just kind of the tip of the spear. I want to get the project through. And people tell me, they come from out of state and they go, where can I get a predictable project done? Where can I do it within a certain amount of time? And where are they supportive of this type of development, so I can come, I fit within what they want, I don't break the mold and try to go crazy and rezone it. And I will push them towards certain jurisdictions, like, for example, urban centers in Miami-Dade County. I say, no problem. What's your product? What do you want to do? Urban centers in Miami-Dade County. If we do that product, they'll give us concierge service, they'll give us fast turnaround time on the applications, and we can build what they want within their parameters. We're not going to go to a public hearing. That, to me, is a fantastic solution, because you planned it, Field of Dreams, they came, they built it, and it's within your parameters. Yes, the lawyers don't make as much money, boo-hoo-hoo, fine, but we have community that gets created out of it. And I think about Coral Gables because they have organized, they were thought of as a master plan community. George Merrick founded the city, and they master planned it. They had a main downtown, and they protected the single family residents. And they have the second or first lowest millage rate of any full service municipality, and they're at 50,000 people in all of Miami-Dade County. How do they do it? They do it because they have the commercial district, and they have the single family district. But there are also opportunities where they have corridors where they can connect with trolley service and get people into the downtown in 2 seconds and back out to the single family areas in 2 seconds, so they can really still enjoy. They don't have to go to downtown Brickell, okay? They don't have to go to Miami Beach, they don't have to go to Wynwood. They kind of have it all right there, and they are a 50,000 person jurisdiction just like you guys are. They're 50,000, 60,000 people are organized a little differently than you are. So
I don't want to miss that point. Do you mind yielding the
Go
remainder,
ahead.
because we're almost there?
I yield.
So
I yield the floor to the gentleman.
this idea of your scale, of your population scale, is really important. When your community comes to you and says, we don't want to be Hialeah, we don't want to be downtown Miami, some of that is aversion to, if I wanted to live in a city, I would have moved to the city. I came to Tamarack because I want to live in this suburb with a single family home, and et cetera, et cetera. And so you're in this Goldilocks spot of having the right size population to be a little bigger, but still a suburban community, but you're big enough that you have the critical mass you need to accomplish what you need to accomplish, right? You're not here with 5,000 residents or 8,000 residents trying to create scale, et cetera, et cetera. And the last comment I'll make before Walter gives me the hook is this. Don't underestimate the power of your school systems. Don't underestimate how important your planning is around the locations of your schools. Because if you look at what creates internal traffic within your community, a lot of that is the internal traffic that it takes to get kids back and forth from school, kids playing soccer in the afternoon, then they have to be somewhere else, and then they have to go to dance class. And all of that sort of outside of working time, like I'll say outside of work commute, your primary driver is probably the location of your school. So look at where your schools are located relative to where the other activities are going to be. Because when you tell your residents we're going to do something and we're thinking about this and that and the other, but we're giving a strong consideration to schools, everybody goes, oh, okay, good.
Yeah, you focus on the amenities and what it allows you to do that you normally couldn't do. And even something as simple as micro parks in neighborhoods that are walkable in the community are another great example that, I'm a big supporter of. Maybe you have a house that's blighted, that's for sale. Go in there as a community because you have the tax dollars now, buy it, build out a micro park for that neighborhood, and then build them out every so often, and then now you're going to see people getting out of their houses, stop using this terrible thing. No problem.
Yep.
I appreciate it. I don't get those very often, but it's fact and it's true. I bought a house within a block and a half of a micro park because I take my kids there, I walk them, I ride bike there to them, and I don't have to get in my car, and it's great. And those are the things that you have to look at on the opportunities that this will allow you to create if you master plan it and you avoid the fight, over the minutia of one project.
Thank you, guys. Fantastic. Let's give them a big hand. So at the center of all this is the big bad developer. And the development community in general will go where it's welcome. Will go where there's a business environment that is predictable. I mean, they will tell you that I've, not technically, literally, but I've got all the money in the world, I just don't have time. I've got my resources, I can't be spreading them in places where it's not going to be productive. So we're going to hear from a developer, and we have one of the top developers in Florida here with us today, and very proud of that. Baron Channer, Woodwater Investments. Raise your hand, Baron. There he is. He is the managing principal of Woodwater Investments, a private real estate development investment firm, a seasoned investment professional. Baron has deep experience in the areas of public-private transactions, master plan development, opportunity zone investments, and affordable workforce housing. Prior to founding Woodwater, he was the VP of Development and Investment for the People's Corporation. Baron's professional highlights include leading over $200 million in transactions, orchestrating the acquisition process for land supporting 1 million square feet of development in downtown Miami, contributing to the acquisition and master planning of 85 acres of government-owned land, and orchestrating asset management for the then third largest hotel in Miami Beach. Baron, what do you got?
Great. Well, first of all, I'm not big and I'm bads. Not bads. I'm just a developer, local yokel, grew up in South Florida. You've heard all the big nuggets, so I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a developer perspective, and then we'll get into conversations. And I'm just one developer, happens to be someone who grew up in South Florida. And so the first thing I would start with is most of the issues that I often hear people have with developers in concept come from two frames. One, it's who do you have do it, right? They're plumbers and they're plumbers. They're doctors and they're doctors. And they're good doctors and bad doctors. And good and bad is not strictly about financial capacity, because that's often the measure, and not strictly about technical capacity. But if you think about a developer is effectively the worker ant for how we live communally. These buildings don't show up by themselves. So the developer that's right for you, the good developer for you, is someone who actually cares about your community in a way that is compatible with the way you care about it. It can never be the same because often they're not from your community. But if you're bringing in developers who have all the money in the world, all the technical ability in the world, and they don't have an interest in how you want to live, then the development you'll get will be perfect for their interests and for the larger market interest, and not for how you want to live. And so now there'll be conflict. They've done a wonderful job economically, because we are economic animals. Ultimately, the markets tell us what to do. But if you don't pick a developer who starts off by saying, I understand how you want to live, and I'm willing to operate within those rules. If your rules are convoluted and unclear, then the developer is going to figure out a way to optimize the one thing they can't avoid. I can't avoid the lender. I sign documents. My wife signs documents. They know where my cars are. They know where my homes are. So I can't avoid them. If your rules are vague and opaque, knowing that I can't avoid them and I can avoid you because your rules are vague and opaque, I'm going to start to drift off of our agreement. So, commissioners, I plan to build this. Well, my lawyer tells me your rules allow me to do a little bit more than I committed to you. The bank tells me I have to do it, so now I start to look like a deceptive person because I'm being pressured by the market and I'm responding to the market, and you've left some opaqueness in your policy making. So oftentimes the issues that I see people have with developers, and there are good and bad developers like anything, but the core issues with the class of people who are developers often stems from, one, misalignment, you're picking the wrong people, or two, your policy framework leaves so much latitude that those individuals, being slaves to the financial market, do things that you wouldn't otherwise like to have done because your policies don't define what's acceptable in a way that fits with the market. So that's one thing I'd start with. The other thing that I think is important as well, and for the public officials that are here, is most of your citizens don't understand the core fundamental economic reality that you're trying to deal with. The reality is inflation is moving faster than their incomes. And even if you decide you don't want to grow and you want to stay the same, it's impossible for the home this year to be as affordable to the 35-year-old young person or the 48-year-old young person or youngish person, I'm 48, that represents your city as it was 10 years ago. And so what do you have to do? You have to start now chasing revenues in different ways. Either you're growing the millage, right? Or you start saying, what are good ways for us to get revenues? And you then have to start entertaining the idea of density. And so most people don't understand that. Most citizens, they just figure, hey, stay away from my taxes, don't do anything else. And they're not understanding, because the conversation's not being had, that this is not just about chasing taxes, but there's real inflation. Even if we do nothing, the costs are going to be higher next year, the year after, and at some point, your income won't keep up. And so you or your kids won't be able to sustain here if we don't find other ways to get revenue, and we don't find other ways to create opportunities for them to access this community at an accessible price point. So that's an important point. I'd like to take a step back, because I think we've all neglected something that is real and true. You know, coming here and prior to preparing for this, you hear about Tamarack, and I've known about your great city and the diversity you have and the vibrancy you're looking to curate, but normally you think about it, I'm a Miami guy. Not sure if that's good or bad, but you think, okay, that's a sleepy suburban community, right? And then what you fail to realize is that the Tamarack that we know today, when you were birthed, right? When you were birthed, your origin story includes a 28-year-old developer deciding to build a project for active adults in the 1960s. That act was a progressive act at the time. He and his team were targeting the rising population of the time, targeting them in a place that was accessible, and observed the rules that existed. That's exactly what the developers in Brickell are doing. They're just targeting a different community at a different time. Now, 60 plus years on, we all forget the origin, which is Tamarack was built to be a progressive city responding to the emergent population. At that time, active adult, I'm pretty sure, was older than 48. And so today, your emergent population, and you all have to decide what it is, has changed. And the ways in which they want to live has changed. And so that's part of why you're thinking about this. You're not departing your DNA, you're revisiting your DNA and saying, we need to revive. And any organism that is not embracing some level of growth, which doesn't mean complete change and reformation, but if your cells aren't rejuvenating a little bit each day, that's not a good thing. If the tree is not birthing a new leaf or two each day, that's not a good thing. And so we're talking now about regeneration selective regeneration to keep the organism healthy. We're not talking about redeveloping the entire city and re-landscaping the city, and the reason you're doing it is to service your residents. And if not them, they all have kids, and you can talk to the average person in your community and ask them, do your kids want to live here when they're your age? Because if they don't, we've got an issue. You sound like you wanted to.
No, I'm
Please.
just nodding in 1,000% agreement with you.
Right? And that's the conversation I always have, is that all I am economically, right? We can put on pretty suits, and some are big and some are bad and some are small and some are tall. All I am is a follower. I'm a tracker. I track economic activity. I need to know, and I want to know, how people are going to live, work, and play, recognizing that I rarely shape it. All I can do is put up a shiny building, small or tall, broad or narrow, and tell them, hey, you say you want to live, work, and play in this way. Look at my building. Please come to my building. And the way the incentive system is set up, I'm generally rewarded last. So part of what you see when you deal with developers and all the different things that come with what a developer has to do their jobs well, even the well-intentioned ones, stem from the fact that I am hoping and dreaming everything I'm doing could work. If it works 90% of the way, I'm a failure, because I needed to work 100% of the way to get to the point where I start to actually get something and my company starts to actually get something. Right? You can't have a 90% complete building that's amazing and have a successful developer. And so we operate from the standpoint of doing things to try to manage risk. What does that mean to you? The riskiest thing you can do as a developer is to face uncertainty around the policy framework, right? Part of the reason, and I talk regularly, including some of the stuff in your city, to major institutional investors who are now thinking about how to play a role in revitalizing distressed retail centers that oftentimes have financing, convoluted financing attached to them. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem they all have, most of them who are in Chicago or New York, is they don't understand your zoning, and the retail center doesn't work as is. And so the only way they can justify doing anything with that big retail center is if they can figure out how to redevelop it in some way. And the only way they know how to do that is to try to figure out how to understand your zoning. And they usually don't have a developer who is facile enough with your zone, not you as a city, but generally, facile enough with the rezoning to give them some certainty that if they took over that shopping center, they could actually get the approvals to do it. And the last thing any financial intermediary, non-developer, wants to do is actually own real estate. They want to make money from real estate and put money into real estate. And so those that have the best policy making framework are going to elicit the best development, right? So that's an important point that often gets lost, right? So some relevant things here, right? In terms of policy making, right? Bad policies are going to bring bad density. You can't avoid density if you embrace growth. The question is how you shape it, because you have to have more units for a little bit more people, and if it's maybe 2%, 3%, but there is going to be growth. And so what we're talking about is how you shape it. Bad policies, complex and convoluted, right? If I don't understand your code, I can't interpret your code. Lawyers will make more money, and that's great. I like to pay lawyers, but I like to pay lawyers for certainty. Developers don't like to pay money for uncertainty. And so if I have certainty, the lawyers can make all the money they want if I know that when we do this, 3 months, 6 months, whatever the time frame is, we can get to the finish line. Convoluted and complex rules discourage that. Input that is limited to planners, staff, and elected. So if you're planning how this city is going to be amazing and it's going to be great, and you have really talented planners, which I'm sure you have access to, you have amazing staff, which obviously you do by this room, and wonderful electeds, you're still missing the boat, because we are all working for the city. Some of us are residents of it, but we are all working for the residents and the business stakeholders of the city. their input needs to be factored into the policy making. Heavy focus on regulating the past. You want 3 cars because historically we've had 2.1 families in the household. We needed 2 cars, and as opposed to regulating and enabling and unlocking the future. Lower car ownership, not zero, but less car ownership, more flexible ownership, smaller cars in different locations, things of that nature, smaller units, not strictly because people are shrinking, but in part because the economics of owning the space has become more challenging. And so a 30-year-old person can't simply buy the average 2-3 bedroom homes. In most communities, they need a smaller place to sustain. Good policy making, being flexible in terms of being flexible and allow for regular enhancements. So don't simply have a rigid code. 10 years later, you come and revisit it with another rigid code, and 10 years later, you come back and revisit it with another rigid code. I'm running short here, but I want to touch on a couple of things that I think are critically important for particularly cities like yours in a place like South Florida, and then I'll yield to Walter. Inclusive development, and oftentimes when I say that as a black person, people think I'm talking about racial diversity, and I'd like to go there, but no, I'm not. In your city, I would say it's unlikely in your city you have a major general contractor that can do a $30 million building. So when the $30 million building comes here, it's unlikely that someone who lives in your community, whose kids play in your Optimist and whatever else, are going to participate economically in that unless you create policies that foster local participation, right? Unless you're intentional with your messaging and hopefully your policies around jobs that are beneficial to your residents, not necessarily that they get all the jobs, but you prioritize jobs that are actually useful and beneficial to your residents, then you can get a lot of development and not create productive economic activity for your community, okay? Environmental resilience. I think we all need to be very, very mindful in Miami Beach, and the cities that are coastal cities are thinking about it, but we're all in relatively flat terrain. At some point, we're all going to have to be thinking about what are we doing with water and sewer, given rising sea levels, right? No statement about how and why, so I know there are partisan perspectives around that, but sea levels are rising, and if they are, then our infrastructure is going to be challenged. Our roads are going to be challenged, and as those things start to happen, you need to have robust revenue streams to be able to buffer yourself, right? And lastly, in closing, we are all very, very fortunate. For those of us who travel for business, think about the situation we would be in if we were in parts of the Midwest with people just as good as us, just as meritorious as us, but not benefiting from 500 people a day coming into their state. And think about the challenges that they would have. So our jobs to sustain that privilege that we've earned since your birth in the 60s and in other cities earlier is to continue to create vibrant communities that attract residents while also serving the residents that are there, because you need to grow on the margins to stay alive, and the growth is going to be people who've not historically been there and likely have a different and newer perspective, so you have to cater to them somewhat as well. And I'll close with that.
Well said. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So I'm going to close today with just a short 5-minute conversation with you regarding my perspective as a former elected official. I feel like I've been in your shoes, and I'm speaking mainly to the public elected leadership in the room and then those that support you. When I got elected in Dania Beach in '09, and I served from '09 to '17, I will tell you, it was a very divided commission. We didn't get along. It was divided on most votes. We differed in philosophy, we differed in background, we differed in who supported us, and you know, it was a challenging time for all of us. But yet, when you look at that period from '09 to '17 and the various commissions through that time, we got a lot done. You look at Dania Beach now, you look at Dania Point along 95 and the beach with the quarterdeck on the pier, and there's another restaurant down there, and Federal Highway got cleaned up, and financially the city was in great shape, and I could go on and on and on. And you know, we put an end to the airport runway litigation that had been a 15-year wait on the city, and got our residents almost $1 billion in benefits. But we bickered and fought a lot. We even had one point when I was mayor, we lost one of the electeds because they got caught living outside the city, and so we only had 4 elected serving, and we couldn't fill that 5th. That's how divided we are. But that said, we got a lot done. We got a lot done, and you look at that city. I'm very proud when I drive back to Dania Beach. I live in Fort Lauderdale now, and the question is, what I want to share with you guys is, how did we do that? How did we get all that done with such a divided commission? And number one is, and we talked a little bit about that today, is we had a shared vision of what the city should look like. What do we want to be? You know, so together, normally on major votes, on major projects and large-scale developments, it was a 5-0 or 4-0 vote, depending on how many electeds we had sitting there. We rarely had any dissension in that, and when it came to the major decisions that impacted the broader future of our city and economic sustainability. Where we argued and where we got political, if you will, was on how we're going to fund nonprofits, or who's going to get X dollars for this parade or that picnic, you know. And so those were the issues. But together as a board, we coalesced around the larger, broader issues. So I would recommend that be a focus. And once we shared that vision, and once we came up with what it is that we want to be and what should we be moving forward, we all beat that drum loudly. We wrote articles in local papers, we put newsletters out to our constituents, and they were generally consistent, and that message was repeatable, and everybody got on board, and we had that shared vision, and so that was a big help. The other thing, too, is sometimes when you look at a large project and you're in local government, or a large redevelopment issue, or you want to move the city in a broader direction, it's very daunting. And the question is, where do you start? And what I learned is you take that first bite of the apple. Just take that first bite. One small example in Dania Beach is, if you've ever seen those silver AT&T signal boxes at various corners around the county, and they've got beautiful art wrapped around them. Well, I noticed that up in Fort Lauderdale, and I wanted to bring it back to Dania Beach, but that's the kind of issue where it would have been very divided politically. That's not a broader issue. That's a small local issue that Walter wants to do, or Joe wants to do, or whoever. So we just did one. We just did one. We didn't make a big deal out of it. We just stuck one in a corner, and little by little, people liked it. And they're like, that's great. Let's do more of those. So, I mean, that's not the best example ever, but just take that first bite of the apple, show everybody that you can do it, then take the next bite, and before you know it, you've got the whole apple eaten. The other thing I want to press upon everybody, and it took a while for me to learn, because when I first got elected, I was not a political person. I rarely voted in local elections, honest disclosure. I was just an appraiser doing appraisals and trying to raise my kids, and I got involved, and it took me a couple years to figure out that the loudest voices in the community aren't necessarily representative of the 80% out there that are quietly working or retired in their house, paying their taxes, abiding by the law. We tended to have, like I'm sure most cities do, a vocal few, but I learned that they don't represent the majority. When you get out there and you get deeper into the community and you meet those folks yourself, you'll see that. You'll see that the few people that talk the loudest don't necessarily represent everybody. So I just want everybody to know that. And the final thing is that we all respectively, each of us, as we moved forward, because the constituents weren't all happy when we'd agree. When we'd agree 5-0, there were people that were unhappy with that. And we all had to take the heat. We all had to collectively, each of us on that board, collectively, politically take that heat and take that pushback from our own constituents and help them understand, hey, this is part of a broader goal and a broader vision we have as a commission. So I really just wanted to share that with you. It doesn't take even the casual observer could pick up the paper or do some internet search and say, listen, your commission has had some challenges as well. And it's not uncommon. Hallandale has had issues, Deerfield in the day, Fort Lauderdale right now where I live is just crazy, if you've been following that. So it's not uncommon, but it can be overcome. And I like the board here, and I grew up in Broward County. I think Tamarack can be a fantastic city. It's nestled in Broward County. We're built out. You've got a lot of land to work with. You're in between two good cities. You've got Sawgrass. You've got an easy way to get to work in Miami, even to Boca Raton if you live here. So you have a lot to work with in Tamarack. You really do. You just need to coalesce around a broader vision. I even had, at one point, we had a large-scale model of our city in the lobby of the City Hall. And it just kind of showed what it would look like eventually if it were built out, if Dania Beach were built out, Dania Point, or the hotels around the airport and that kind of thing. So sometimes, if you're able to help folks visualize, they say when you ride a motorcycle, you see there, you go there, you watch where you want to go. And I think that's what you need to do as a city, and that would be my 2 cents. So I thank you very much for listening and for being here and for making it such a priority in your city to do the the right thing. We have about 40 minutes for Q&A, and I know I've got a lot of questions for you guys, and I'm sure you do too. So let's start off with any questions for our board. I know we brought up a lot today, and we covered a lot. We have a mic going
Let's
around.
start with the mayor.
Okay, let's start with the mayor over here. Yes, ma'am, Mayor Gomez.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all very much for being here, for your presentation, for your helping us with visualizing leadership and what we need to do. I have to say that we have the most wonderful city staff. Our whole team is absolutely phenomenal as well. And so some of the things you were saying, I know we're all going, we do that, we do that, we do that. We've checked those boxes because we have been paying attention, and we appreciate that ULI was here 5 years ago. And so not to say we can't improve. Of course we can. And so just going to touch on a few points because I won't take all 45 minutes, I promise. I am a very proud ULI Leadership Institute graduate. Woohoo. I encourage my commission to take the time to do it. It really is phenomenal. Being a person who has come here as a child and watched it grow, I know exactly what you're talking about. Would you live here? I said I would never move here. And I've also said since I've been on the commission, this is not my grandparents' Tamarack anymore. So as we want to do growth, we can only do certain things one project at a time, because as much as we may want to, we don't own all the property. So we can only work with what we've got. And we can only work with some of what was in the red, with what was built, and the rules from the past. I'm very proud that we did a very intensive overview to our code in 2018 to try to be more developer friendly. We may still have a little sticky things in there because we as a commission, we like to be involved, much to the chagrin of our staff.
Is
right?
there a question, Mayor?
Yes, there is. I'm going to the issues with parking. So I see that we had up there something with all red, and I pretty much believe I know where the area is. So I was just curious if you would tell us which location that is. Okay, never mind. So I'll just put it this way. At a later date, let us know. Please do. I just came from a meeting with people who want to develop in our city. I am sorry that I do not agree with the full part of lessen the density for those cars because developers don't want to pay for concrete. I get it. But at the same token, if you look in our parking lot, you're not seeing cars get smaller. You're seeing a lot of Suburbans. You see a lot of bigger cars. Even the EV cars are bigger and bigger. And we're never going to get out of our cars. We live in Florida. We live in hot Florida other than today. And so I would only disagree with you on that and worry about considering the fact that parking, if you say, what was one of the quotes, parking needs to be based on the market, not on the code. But then how do we give you a code that works with a market and a market that's always changing? So I don't know if you can give me an answer, or yes, I did think it was Bermuda Club too. At that time, Bermuda Club did have a lot of people who drove. So there's certain things that we can't change. But we got to be careful about trying to base a code on something that evolves, but people are always in their cars. So how do you help us with coming up to what actually works?
Sure. So maybe I can start with that because a lot of that's tied to value. I think Barron alluded to it before, rather, that his bankers essentially have a say in this as well. I think the comment that was made was when Juan was speaking was, you don't have to worry about dictating the parking requirement relative to the building because the developer is going to match the market. So if you're in a market that's primarily a car market, they're going to know that they have to build a certain amount of parking, and they'll build what the market needs, right? They're not going to necessarily abandon that because that's going to impact the success of their project. But when we talk about density and how to change, think about what 1,000 square feet requires. So if you build a 1,000 square foot office, you have 5 parking spaces per 1,000. That's the typical, I don't know what your code is, but it's probably something in that order of magnitude. If you want to do medical office, you have 7 spaces per 1,000. If you want to do retail, oftentimes you're at 5 to 7 spaces per 1,000. So 1,000 square feet of any of the commercial property types, you're usually buying into 5, 6, or 7 cars per 1,000. Whereas if you do multifamily, and 1,000 square foot multifamily, that's like a 2-bedroom. So that might be 2 cars per 1,000. So a lot of people, sort of pull back and they say, well, we don't want we don't want to build a bunch of multifamily because it's going to generate traffic. But if you're substituting that and comparing it to what traffic would arise if you built office or retail or medical office, it's half the amount of traffic. But the idea is, what I think the comment that was made, and I don't want to understate it, you don't have to prescribe in your code the minimum parking per 1,000 doesn't have to match the market at all times, because the market's going to match the market. You just need to give some guidelines. And if you want to reduce your parking requirements to encourage the developers to find some alternatives, and they can't, they will figure out other alternative ways to provide services, parking, shared vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. It's not likely in this suburban community that you're going to get away from a typical parking ratio. It's just a matter of where you put the parking. You know, do you have to have it all right up front, you know, right on the road as you pull in? Do you, can you put a certain amount of parking in the back? Can you have an off lot? Can you build a small park, structured parking is very expensive. It's difficult to do. But, two-story where it's not podium is doable. So do you allow accessory parking structures in your code? Because if you do, maybe someone will do a two-story or a covered parking structure. So there's ways to do it to make it less intrusive. The idea, though, and I think the comment that was made up here was, you don't have to mandate parking because the market will mandate parking. So having that in your code isn't necessarily required.
I would just add that I've been practicing law for 20 years, and even in those 20 years, technology has evolved tremendously, even in the real estate space. People think nothing really works. It's just bricks, right? People say bricks and mortars versus tech. Technology has changed a lot. COVID has changed the way we act. People are working from home. Shared rides will be the future. It will be sooner that it will be illegal to drive a car in certain urban areas than not. I mean, this is what will happen in the next, definitely in my lifetime, in the next 10 years. But that's not today. I get what you're saying. But at the other end of the spectrum, we have projects where 54% of the square footage of the building is parking structure, and only 46% of the square footage is the actual residential use. So think about the impact of that in terms of sustainability, the environment, the cost of construction and the unit. And so there has to be some balancing of those two things. I've seen every parking ratio under the sun. Some that are dynamic and tied to the product type. Some are tied to the unit size. Some will have a standard parking ratio per unit, no matter how many units, how many bedrooms you have in that unit, which is, not great. But then you have just facts to deal with. The 20% of all cities, their surface area are parking lots. Arlington is probably the worst in the United States. 42% of Arlington is a surface parking lot. It's insane. So I'm not saying that's Tamarack, but parking, no pun intended, is driving a lot of development right now. And if you think about what you want your city to be, you can get away from getting in the car for everything, but it has to be in a way where you plan it and you can create that corridor and you can leverage your shuttle system into a trolley system along a particular corridor to start, for example, and then lessen the parking requirements on that corridor. I used to live in a place like that. I would just get on the trolley and I would go to my office, and I would go from the office back to my home. Why did I live there? I lived there specifically because I wouldn't have to get in my car every day and everybody else was sitting in 40 minutes of traffic. And I'm 45, but people that are younger than me even think more aggressively in terms of those parking ratios. So youth is changing things, and also economics are changing things, because after the cost of living, the number two cost they have to face is transportation. And when you think about, okay, I even have an attorney in my office that, our starting salary is nothing to bat an eye at, and they're saying, I don't have a car. Well, why don't you have a car? Well, if I bought a car, it would cost me $20,000, even something cheap and used. So I don't have $20,000 to spare. Okay, well, why don't you finance it? Well, that'll be $300 a month, and I still got to pay insurance, which is $100 a month, and I still got to pay tax. Why am I blowing $500 a month on something that I don't have to use? I can work remotely. I can live on a transit corridor. So the world exists in a way that, we want to control, but it's just evolving so rapidly. That's why the demand-based system, is not one to be afraid of. And sorry if I went off on a tangent
That's
there.
okay. Baron, you want to jump in there real quick?
Juan has something to say. Go ahead.
No, just rest assured that nobody is going to build here without parking.
Yeah, for sure.
Because no developer or nobody's going to buy anything unless they have parking, because right now you don't have the services to provide an option. Having said that, I recommend that you guys take a look at the parking reform network. I'm an advisor to that. It's a national movement to get rid of parking mandates, because it's an outdated practice. The other thing that I'll tell you too is to consider, once you begin to reconsider your land uses and their adjacencies, shared parking.
Yes.
And I can tell you that's something that when I first moved to this country, I read it in codes and I was like, yeah, that's great. I'm living it. I actually park, my office, my employees, they park in a church behind our office because they only use their parking on Sundays.
You know,
So-
another common example of that is multifamily and commercial. You know, like a retail center where you drop a multifamily asset into the property. Apartment folks live there at night and on the weekends necessarily, and then the retailer, your office is there during the day.
The best are cinemas, an office, and office and churches, because they, you never do both at the same time. But I'm telling you, behind Coral Way, where our office is at, there's a church, and they make a killing. And by the way, it's tax deductible, because it's a donation. So it's maybe I shouldn't have said that.
We're not sure about that.
We're not sure about that, but from the perspective of our office building does not provide parking, you are basically making use of something that would be vacant most of the time. I will give you the location of that parking, but one last thing, we are working on an affordable component in Opaloka for seniors. You were asking about seniors. The developer decided that most seniors don't really need to drive if given a different way to move, and it was ludicrous to ask for 2 parking spaces per unit for 2 bedrooms for seniors above 6. I think it's 55 and up or 65 and up. Yeah.
I'm only-
No. And I'm telling you,
I'm only 10 years away from that. You're scaring
I'm
me.
not that far either, and I'm hoping that I will still be able to drive. But again, if you got anything out of my part of the presentation, give options. Provide options for your stakeholders. Provide options for your developers, because they also need to be incentivized to do the right thing. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
But provide options. That's why we live in this country, because we have options.
Yeah. A lot has been said. I'll add 2 things to it really quickly. One, I believe if you're successful, which you will be in attracting all of this development that you plan to attract, if you think about the economics of it, the numbers have changed, but to build a parking space and structured parking is probably in the ballpark of $30,000 per space. If you told me to put $15,000 in almost anything that you thought was meritorious for your city, maybe even $20,000, I don't want to give away too much, but let's say 15, I would do it. That thing that I put $15,000 into per space that I asked for your reduction, which could be limited to no less than 20% reduction or 25% reduction, could be a Tamarack Mobility Fund. That Tamarack Mobility Fund could be used for the benefits of all kinds of residents, including the people that live in these communities, that then want to go to the supermarket or whatever have you, that have a shuttle that comes to pick them up, or there's all sorts of rideshare solutions. So think about that as well. The last piece to think about is, as a developer, I'm forced to think about 30 years into the future, hoping that I'll still be around then, but knowing that all the financial sources behind me are thinking about that. If you project 30 years into the future, who knows when, but by then, we already have autonomous cars today that have done millions of miles without accidents. Some have had accidents. 30 years from now,
Much
there's
less
gonna
than
be
human beings, though. Let's be realistic.
30 years from now, you're going to have more of those cars that are going to be readily available. And so there's going to be a day where you don't need to park your car if you need to own a car in front of your house, because when you need a car, you will come out and the car will be there. I've not driven, I have a car, I've literally, just because I just wanted to test it out, I've actually not driven my car for 6 months. And I'm here, I'm coming from Miami, I go a lot of places, I follow Julie all around, right? And so I'm not a novelty, and I'm not living in the heart of downtown Miami. I just wanted to test it out as a developer to see if it was real for people to do that with consistency as I started to think about my project. So those are 2 things I would add to it.
We need to move off parking though, so you guys can get into something else.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for your presentation. In reference to the walking, I wouldn't say Tamarack is necessarily a walking community because I walk from City Hall to my flat, which is about a mile. And every time I've walked, I've had the assistant city manager stop for me, and I've had all the fire guys stop for me. So it's like, I look crazy when I walk. People think, what's up with this guy walking through the place? So it's not necessarily a walking city. I would say that, but I try to do that because I've lived in urban areas. I tend to get around, and I've spent time in urban area, Dania Point, Coral Gables, the places where he mentioned in terms of visiting friends. And I think when the suburbs was created in the 1950s, when Eisenhower created the interstate system, it was like we have the city centers in downtown, and we have the suburbs where people want to come and live. So I think people in Tamarack still want to experience that suburban living, having the home, the white picket fence. That's like the litmus test of the American dream. But a few weeks ago, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about the forever renter, the people that are in my age group, under 40, who are high-earning professionals who now want to rent for a long time because of interest rates and all that stuff. So those individuals would have purchased a home in the suburb before with the white picket fence, but now they want to live in an environment that has services, live-work environment, kind of like what you describe in terms of what a developer looks for. And you mentioned that you create what the market wants. So the market-driven forces are that this is what this generation wants. And as a marketer, from 18 to 54, that's the core demographics that you focus on. That's the core generation. So as you mentioned, you're only building the product for what people want, and you're just evolving and adapting to that. But one of the things the residents complain about, especially single-family residents, they see renters as bad. As like, hey, these renters are coming into our communities, they're transient, they're not going to stay. But that article opened my eye because the renters now are no longer the transient people. It's higher earning professionals who want to live in these environments, who want to have a place where they can work, live, and do all that stuff. So how do we articulate that vision to the existing single family resident? It's a suburban community. How do we tell them, hey, having a city center, having these mixed use development, it doesn't hurt your community. Actually, it enhances the community. Yes, I get the service part. I understand the budgets. I get all the things that we can quantify. But how do we articulate something that we can quantify in a way that let these residents know that these people who are coming in are actually making your community more valuable? Because these are people who are earning six figures. These are people who are earning 200,000. It's no longer the transient person who's for lack of a better word, a working class person. Mm-hmm. So how do we articulate that as an elected official to our constituents?
Sure. There's a bunch of answers, and you're going to get a bunch of them. But one thing I'd say is there's a practical reality today that you have to have that conversation amongst yourself and with your residents. You have these strip malls, which were good and productive in an era where they are being made more and more obsolete by the day. Something has to happen, or nothing will happen, which is itself something. That something that could be positive in terms of pro-growth for your revenue base, which means stable to shrinking millage for your existing tenants, is redevelopment and revitalization for that strip center. That's not in your backyard, that's not in your community, it's in our community, it's there, and we're trying to fortify the hubs and the major corridors of our community, and one of the ways to do so is not to try to go back to the past that's retail driven exclusively, is to embrace the idea that some people, maybe not you, but some people want to live in a mixed context, and them living in a mixed context will allow us to have better retail development accessible to you and more revenues for us to allow us to control your millage. I think that conversation can be led with, Juan did a very good job talking about density, a whole lot about no parking. Maybe he leaves that part out for you, and he comes and he talks to your residents or someone else about all of that. There's a conversation about how do we need to live as a city to be affordable to you.
And that's a great segue to your first question, which was walkability. I did not say that this is a walkable city yet, but you would be surprised on how many projects we have currently moving forward on retrofitting non-pedestrian environments into pedestrian environments, places that you would not believe, places like this. I'm driving here. I don't know, what was this one? 5 lanes, 6, 7 lanes, right? There's something crazy here, which I assume is DOT, right? That's the other elephant in the room that we have not discussed. But you have to work with other agencies in order to retrofit the existing framework. Now, why would you do that, right? Why would you retrofit this street Commerce, was it? Commercial. Why would you retrofit it if you're the only one walking? I mean, you know, maybe just for you. No, but if you start providing those uses that he's talking about, if you start providing that different type of housing that may not be for you guys, but maybe for the next generation that wants to live on top of the retail, then suddenly you've got destinations within a quarter mile from all these existing single-family residential units, and then you're going to start seeing more people walking. You have a lack of destinations that are walkable, but when you start strengthening those corridors with mix of uses and places that people want to get to, people will find other ways than the car to get to them.
So in this county, only 6% of our workforce can afford a median-priced home at $570,000, only 6%. So that means 94% of us are in the other camp where we need to rent. And when you look at what the typical rental community is, whether it's a brand new market rate community or whether it's a workforce or affordable community, the household income or what they pay for rent is going to be 30% of their household income. So if you have the typical market rent in this county, the average market rent is $2,800. So if you look at a 30% household expenditure ratio, that person's going to make $112,000. So one of the things we do, and we do a lot of education of the county commission too about workforce communities. And the other aspect of an affordable workforce community is that the folks in that 100-unit community, let's just say that is built in a former shopping center site. And now you've got 100 new families, 100 new consumers. Would you rather have 100 families that are strapped to their rental payments every month, or would you rather have 100 families that are only paying 30% of their household income because the project is restricted in some way, and then they're better consumers in the community, and they get into your stores, and they get into your shops? We really didn't touch on it today, but if you want to promote retail and you want to promote restaurants, those operators and developers need to see the consumer revenue. They need to see the buying power in the community, and so you need to attract folks in this community that are making money. And one of the ways to do that is to repurpose these shopping centers under Live Local and the Geller Amendment, which is some other land use policies that are available. But that's what I would recommend, is really think about repurposing some of these, or encouraging the repurposing of some of these centers under Live Local or the Geller Amendment, getting some new consumers in the community that can spend. And the ratio of home ownership has been going down since World War II, and no longer is it if you can't own, you rent. Although there's a lot of that right now. It's really by choice. It's by choice. It's by lifestyle. I work remotely. I travel a lot. I don't want to be tied down to a house. But they're perfectly good consumers that make a real good living. No other questions? Anybody?
I just wanted to say real quick.
Yeah.
The most successful charrettes and things of that nature that I've done are ones where you focus on the benefits of what you want to accomplish, whether it's the micro parks or the transit or the police department, et cetera, at these meetings. And that will bring out a lot of different people. Because if you talk about development, you're only going to bring out the tyranny of the minority that don't want it. And everybody else will be busy with their own lives and raising their kids. And so if you probably better have a broader meeting about kind of the goals of what you want. How you get there is obviously through the density discussion we're having. And in that meeting, you can find who the people are that support you and encourage them to continue to come out and show their support. I will tell you that for the most part, you will find a lot of supporters, but they're just not as vocal, and you have to get them and elicit them to get involved in the community. Because the people that are involved in the community are the ones that are next door, which is I don't even want to talk about next door as an application. and what happens is the bullies, these people are, for the most part, I can use the word bully. And I see it all the time, that this smaller group, you have a dissenting opinion, or an opinion that's anything dissenting, not in a minority, but in the sense that they don't agree with that person, they will just cut them out of the next door chat, or they won't bring them to the meetings. And so you have, this is what I tell you, you have bullies in these neighborhoods, okay? Straight up bullies in these neighborhoods, and you gotta circumvent the bullies and get to the people that actually will benefit and want these services. Think of them that way, okay? that they're the people you're going to serve. So that's my advice.
You know, to add to that, and what I mentioned in my 5 lessons learned was you have to have the political will. You have to take the heat. And you know, when you coalesce around a large vision and you move forward as a group, as a voting group, you're each going to take heat from your respective. Why'd you agree with him? Why'd you agree with her? You each have to stick together on those big decisions. You can fight the little local things, but you got to stick together and take the heat because there are bullies out there. He's right about that. Anybody else?
Yeah. It's not a question. I just wanted to say thank you for all your expertise and being here today in front of all of us that need to hear this information. It's very important for us to hear from experts from all different fields. So just want to say thank you.
I have a question for the group. What would you view as the economic center of the city? I mean, I'll tell you, when I first got elected in Dania, the economic center of the city they felt was around City Hall, downtown, which wasn't really a downtown, around the Arts District, Antique Row. But I viewed it as Griffin and 95 was the economic center of the city when you look at it. And, you know, it's where the most height is. It's the design center of the Americas. It's outdoor world. You know, and so my question, and so until we redefine that, until we all got on the same page and sort of figure that out, you know, we flailed. And I would ask you collectively, if you can't all get on the same page as to where the economic center of the city is, that's the first problem. Where is it? Commercial Boulevard? Yeah, it's more of a district, right? It's more of a.
It's a corridor that it's a corridor, 2 corridors that meet, and you have like Main and Main will be commercial and.
University Drive, you have commercial north. Yeah, I would agree, and I think that's where you have the most potential to redevelop some of these old shopping centers. There's too much asphalt. There's too much surface parking, and you know.
Walter,
But
I just want to warn you that when you have a city that doesn't have a clear location where the energy needs to go and you want to spread it throughout your corridors, you're not going to succeed. And again, I have not done a full study of your city, so I'm speaking from my little bit of research that I've done to prepare this for this presentation. But from what I saw, there is an opportunity to identify 2 nodes, maybe 3. And if you want to walk people through why those areas should be densified further and more attention should be paid to those 2-3 locations, then you begin to do TDRs, which would protect other areas like single-family areas from overdevelopment. One of the things that you were saying earlier was that you would be willing to pay to reduce your parking, right?
To a certain extent.
To a certain extent. Which the reason why I bring that back is because developers will be willing potentially to develop more if the TDR price is right, which in turn, again, protects other areas, and it creates an internal market that begins to concentrate that energy into, you know, those nexus. Think of it as flavor, right? If your dish is too big and you just have limited amount of spice, you know, if you spread the spice around the entire dish, you're not going to taste it. But if you want to really enjoy the meal and the taste of the food, you might want to concentrate that spice in a smaller portion of your meal. Should I explain TDRs? Transit of development rights. You can also do TDDs, which is transfer of development density. And
Square footage versus units.
That basically, yeah, it's basically a market where you take density from one place and you put it somewhere else. And there's always sending and receiving areas. You typically do that for historic districts where you have a church in the downtown, let's say, you know, and the church is not going to go anywhere, and the church, you know, is typically strapped for money, and so they sell the rights to develop, you know, forever, by taking whatever they could have developed in that place instead of the one-story church into an area where they can gain, you know, 4 or 5 additional stories, or however many. It really depends on the ratio. But I would encourage you to look at these techniques, these tools, and begin to, and again, this is just me, I think that a study needs to be done, I think that a charrette needs to be done, I think that you need a vision plan if you don't have it already, so that you have the support of your stakeholders. But more than anything, try and figure out where is the there. Have you guys heard of the term there, right? It's you know, I've also heard it called the postcard moment. Where is the postcard moment in Tamarack, right? Where do people take selfies, right? Here, surrounded by parking in the parking lot?
No, look at the view. Look at you.
Okay, so.
So let me just jump in real quick, if you want to finish your thought. We got a
Yeah,
couple questions out there.
That's it. Consider,
Okay,
consider concentrating.
Yeah, back here,
future
over here, yes, ma'am?
Let me start off by saying thank you. It's extremely inspiring. It spoke of our frustration where, you know, voices in the city that's not heard, you know, the younger residents with kids, family. When you said the micro park, I wanted to scream, like, please, please bring more. My question is, what's the time frame, right? And I guess the time frame is up to us. But say if we were all in, what is the time frame to see the change?
I mean,
First, you have to define what change.
I think you have to look at,
One of the changes to get what you said, where do you go in Tamarack? For me, it's Publix. And that's sad. I've said it jokingly,
Well,
but
I can tell you
yeah.
in Dania Beach, it took 7 years from start. But you guys are already just started. You know, I see this as a 3 or 4. It's slow. It's hard to build consensus. That's why working in the local government is very challenging. And it took me a few years to get used to because I never was in that environment, but I get it. The second, we have another question back here.
Can I just weigh in on
Yeah,
that
yeah,
real quick?
please.
Because I don't want anybody to be disillusioned. I'll tell you a quick little story. I live in a little town south of downtown Miami, and my little town of Pinecrest, 20,000 residents, decided that in their commercial corridors along US 1s, we were going to allow multifamily development. And my wife said, you need to go into town and fight that. And I said, why? And she said, because all the people who move in there is going to destroy our housing values. I said, babe, this is exactly what I do every day for the last 30 years. No, I'm not walking into town and destroying the land use plan. 2.5 years, referendum went out, it became a political issue in the town, divided the town, the referendum. So it really depends on how much consensus building you can get done in advance and how that vision evolves. But I would say realistically in most communities, it's a full election cycle, right? It's like you got to get through a couple years worth of talking and going and making sure everybody's building on that. I think realistically, you'd be less than 36 months would be extremely aggressive, and you'd have to be sort of off the ground or have sites that were ready to and ripe to be developed. We're at a point in the market cycle right now where I think it's going to take some time anyway, even if you snapped your fingers and did it tomorrow. But I would think like 3 to 5 years to get the plan to the point where you're going to start to actually see development. That doesn't mean the town can't invest in certain things first, but I think 3 to 5 years is probably a realistic time frame. If it's less than that, you're at blazing speed, and even if it's a little more than that, you're not behind. That's pretty much what it takes.
They've been working on their retail corridor revitalization for years. So you guys have some really exciting opportunities, I believe, already right in front of you. So you don't want to, like, you know, there's phases of this process that you need to look at and evaluate and get started. And there's quite a few retail strip centers that you're evaluating, if I'm remembering a leadership project that we did with you a few years back.
Yeah. What I was going to say is the market doesn't care if you need time, right? Remember what I said, most of the things you hate about developers often come back to the fact that you leave a big void in terms of what can be done and very little rules as to what can't be done, and they operate and they move around in that void in ways that make you uncomfortable, whereas we're just worker ants. If you draw a straight line, we follow that straight line. If you make it wide open, we roam around and try to figure out where the wall is. So you have projects that are going to be presented to you, and yes, Anthony's right, the market's going to slow them down a little bit in terms of construction, but the smart developer tries to get approvals as soon as possible so that once construction is feasible, they can go, and once they have approvals, you know, our legal system and our governance system says they're vested, so the market's not going to wait for you in regards to the new development activity. In regards to the legacy communities, I think the places you start is you start by having community conversations around public spaces and things of that nature, because there's still an opportunity to establish a shared narrative. And maybe you start in pockets. Maybe there are places that are ready to have that conversation, and so you start to concentrate the discussion around that. I can't emphasize enough the idea of charrettes. You know, sometimes it gets poo-pooed, but you're going to end up in vigorous debates about what's right and what's not right if you don't just have heated conversations and get to some uneasy consensus up front, right? But developers aren't going to, the market doesn't care about what you think should happen. You have rules now, and someone, not me, because I'm here volunteering, someone's going to be trying to figure out how to optimize those rules, and they're going to be optimizing it for the most rigid thing in their life, which is the financial markets, which says build as much as you can, as moderately priced as you can to maximize your profits. And if you like it, great. If you don't like it, those are your rules or lack of rules.
We have time for one more question. Yes, sir, Marlon?
Well, thank you very much for the presentations. I'll start out with this, that when I heard about this workshop, I did not want to come because I feel like these things indoctrinate people and you kind of like start thinking, you know, a different way. But in a good way, this indoctrinated me. And
it opened your mind. It opened your mind to a new indoctrination.
Right, and so now I'm glad I came, or I'm glad I was indoctrinated. So whatever you did worked, you know. But I sat here and I kept thinking about my journey, coming from first and foremost, I lived in Miami Beach before, and everything was walking and going to the supermarket and going to the club or the church. You know, and then, you know, going home, right? And then I moved to Tamarack and, you know, everything changed. You needed a car. The other day I was fixing my car. I drive a Tesla, Tesla Nation. And, you know, I was fixing it. I had to get an oil change. I'm just joking. But I was fixing the car and I had to take an Uber several places. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive.
Yeah.
Quite. You know, it is so expensive, right? And so it goes back to what, you know, Vice Mayor Wright was saying. You know, we need to start building out a city where it caters more to those who are moving here. And this is what people want. I was talking to a developer the other day and he says, do you know the amount of money it takes from the start of a project to the point where it actually comes before the city commission? And it's a lot of money. And sometimes when they come there, we just say no.
Right,
We
that's
send them home.
why the developer wants
Yeah.
predictability.
Exactly.
Not a guaranteed yes, just a
Yeah.
predictable professional environment to work in.
And that is my point, right? It comes back to then predictability and that brave commissioner. Because a lot of people in the community are going to say, let's say no to, because this is going to bring traffic, it's too high, it's too big, it's too wide. You know, so I say all of that to say, you've indoctrinated me, I'm ready to jump in. I've seen some very big projects coming. I looked at it, I opened my eyes, I was scared, but I'm not so scared. Because it is not me, it is not about my vision, but it's about the future. And here's the last thing. I'm the first to say how many mistakes I made, you know, on the city commission, you know, for the past 7 years. There was a development right close to my home. There is a 55 and older community right next door. They begged me, they said, please do not build this apartment. It's going to bring in all sorts of people and it's going to have the undesirables. And
Those people.
those people, right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing. The development is now finished and I go back to that 55 and older community and they said, wow, it is so beautiful.
Every single
we want
time.
more of this. And I'm like, you were the one who told me not to say yes. So I appreciate you and I appreciate all of you coming. This has really changed my perspective,
So
and I can say I'm going to be
you
the
guys,
brave
big part of
commissioner.
your job is educating your residents, your taxpayers. I spend a lot of time educating the county commission on the benefits of workforce and affordable housing, and you would be surprised of the tremendous economic impact that results from 100-unit community like that. The jobs created, the spending in the community, it's really unbelievable. So it's really just going to be an education process. One more question, and then we're going to wrap
Can I
up for the
sneak
night.
one question
Yeah, of
in?
course, please.
Thank
you for
you.
that, Marlon.
Thank you. I am a resident and a volunteer for the city, and I appreciate being invited here, and I've learned a lot, and I'm grateful for what I've learned. I think it will help me with my position. Specifically, I have a question for Juan. Mr. Mullerant, you mentioned bringing in multi-dimensional buildings, and it reminded me of Miami. And what made me think is a lot of us moved to Tamarack because we wanted to get away from the Miami look, the Miami feel. However, I can also appreciate the walkable community. That's something that I actually am interested in. Like Vice Mayor Wright, I've oftentimes walked to the store or tried to walk somewhere just to get some exercise in. What I'm trying to decipher here, or trying to get a better understanding, is how do I, when I'm sitting on the planning board, how do I make an informed decision about bringing more buildings in, the multi-use or the mixed look, the multifamily house next to the smaller multifamily house, and not have it look like something that I think is undesirable or that some of the residents may think is undesirable. Can you kind of lend more to that?
Sure. Let me start by saying that you started with Mr. Mullerant. I'm typically in trouble when people do that. So again, I'm going to say everything that has been said already. It's about building consensus, and that the vision comes from people. If you can put together, if the city can put together a vision plan for the city that looks years ahead and provides a guide for you guys to make the decisions that you need to make,
100%.
it'll give you exactly what those places need to look like. Now, I was talking about a mix of uses, building types, et cetera, because that's what makes cities interesting. You don't want, my wife grew up in Jupiter, in one of these cookie cutter developments, and I swear to you that I dated her for like 4 years, and not even after 4 years I could find her parents' home. They were all the same friggin' tree. They used to cut them the same way. You need that variety, not just so that boyfriends don't get lost, but also because it creates interest, it creates value, and it creates a destination per se. It also provides the different housing types, provide an avenue for a variety of people to move here that is not just the 50 and above. It creates a market so that you retain your youth, which I don't think that is happening if you look at your demographics. Am I right?
Yes and no. I moved here when I was 20. And I moved here because I liked the Tamarack. I'm now like it's huge and
Where do you go out at night? I could probably guess.
To be quite honest with you, no. To be quite honest with you,
I don't live too far.
to be quite honest with you, I have done activities in Tamarack. There are a few areas that have frequented in Tamarack.
Thank goodness Coconut Creek built the promenade, because we had nothing
There's
before.
a hookah place, there's an art gallery, there's a hookah place on University Drive that had a semi-private art show. And I went in Tamarack. There's also a club, Caribbean
Okay.
on the floor. So I have played.
The reason why I'm telling you that you have that you need to retain your youth is because I've seen this time and time again in what I typically call bedroom communities, where once kids turn 18 and they tend to move out, they're seeking other experiences, other places, and they typically move out to university. If they do, it's typically not here. And when they are done with university, typically they don't come back. And I'm seeing that time and time again. I would be surprised if you actually do not have a brain drain here. And so providing these types of housing, you were asking about rentals. Rentals are not just for people with lesser means anymore. Rentals are for students. They are for workforce
young
as well.
professional.
For young professionals. I'm seeing in Little Havana, in Miami in general, I'm seeing ancillary dwelling units, which are the little houses that you have in the back of your single-family lot. you know, the little las casitas, the little cottages. Those are used for healthcare workers that are taking care, nurses that are taking care of the elderly in the home in front. I even have a friend who moved to his little home and now is renting his large home to make ends meet. So I mean, this creates an economic flexibility for families that you don't have if everything is like my parents-in-law's house.
Don't make fun of the cookie cutter home.
So,
I just-
if I may, we're gonna. Tony's got a comment. We're gonna close. And go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, so we're speaking in the abstract, and I think that while lawyers think each one of their words is worth $1,000, and sometimes they might charge it that way, a picture is really worth 1,000 words. You should go and look at town centers that could potentially be what Tamarack can have. I didn't say city centers, I said town centers. And it's all in the vernacular you use. Town centers are of scale. I went to Delray Beach last week, and they were having a jazz festival. And let me tell you something, not a car, they closed the streets down, it was all pedestrian, they had a stage, everybody in the community came out to this jazz festival because they have a town center where they can congregate. And it wasn't really much scale, it was like 4 or 5 stories, but it came around a particular area with a bunch of roundabouts. The next weekend, in 2 weeks, they're gonna have their annual, I think one of their last farmers markets. So they do farmers markets there on the last, whatever it is, weekend of every month, and everybody knows, and so this programming that is created around a town center, not some big city, out-of-scale, Brickell, Miami stuff. I'm talking about Delray Beach Town Center. Look at those as an example. Use those as kind of the discussion points for your neighbors. I can't imagine anybody in Tamarack, if somebody in Tamarack doesn't want what I just saw in Delray Beach with the jazz festival, everything of scale, pedestrian, I mean, they're just, I would really believe that they would be difficult to
Could be
find.
something as simple as an amphitheater and a parking structure next to City Hall. That could be a start, but just be thinking that way. So I want to thank ULI, Julie, and your team. Thank you very much today. Let's give them a big hand. I'd also like to, of course, on behalf of the panel and the staff, we'd like to thank the first responders that were here today. Thank you very much for keeping us safe. And then, of course, our fantastic panel, Tony, Graz, Juan, Baron, fantastic job. You guys, thank you for your time today. We appreciate that. And then most importantly, thank you to you all. Thank you to the city officials, city managers, city staff. You're all here together on your time, trying to make the city better on behalf of the residents and the taxpayers and the stakeholders. And there's a lot to be said about that. Thank you for your service and thank you for your attendance today. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for this incredible informational informative session, and it's clear that for the future success of the city's development, we're going to need this on a daily basis. This dose of
We'll be back on
conversation. Please do. This really was an incredible session for all of us. I think eye-opening session. So we truly appreciate everything that we heard today. So as a token of our appreciation, please accept this small gift. So we're looking forward to doing this again. And commissioners, staff, thank you all so much for attending. And I hope this helped. And we're looking forward to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all.